Hello and welcome back to the Hazzabhajan YouTube channel. It is Harry here, and today it is time for another episode in my Nation Roulette series. If you are new to the channel and you don't quite know what Nation Roulette is, this is the series where I go through countries all across the world and profile their current footballing scene as well as its history. And today it is the turn of the African country of Tunisia to be profiled. If you haven't seen any of the other Nation Roulette episodes thus far, there is a playlist link in the description down below for you to check them all out. And if you are new around here, don't forget to drop a like on the video and subscribe if you have not done so already. But without any further ado, let's examine, or rather profile, or insert verb of your own choice here, the footballing scene and history in Tunisia. Tunisia is the northernmost country in Africa and is a part of the Maghrebin region alongside the likes of Libya and Algeria, both of whom Tunisia shares a border with. It is actually a lot smaller than I originally thought though, as it covers 163,610 kilometers squared, making it the smallest out of all of the Maghrebin countries, and its population is around 11.7 million people as of the 2020 estimates. The region of Tunisia was originally ruled over by the Carthaginians until the Roman Empire conquered it in 146 BC, before they in turn were kicked out by various Muslim factions by 697 AD, who'd replaced Christianity, which the Romans had introduced, with Islamism and Arab cultures. However, the French invaded the region in 1881 after 3 centuries of control by the Ottoman Empire, and thus Tunisia lost the autonomy that it had gained during the 1830s, although the French did allow Tunisia to maintain their monarchy, and they didn't convert mosques into churches or change the language of the country from Arabic to French, treating it more as a protectorate instead of an outright colony. During the pre-invasion years, a sport which bore striking similarities to football, entitled Khalif, had been popular. Khalif was a sport in which several players would attempt to score a goal, and once they did so, they progressed to the next round, with the last one standing per round being eliminated, and the player who scored goals in every single round being declared the winner. And I personally think that's a much better alternative to extra time and the penalty shootout, but that might just be me. This, as well as another sport entitled El Kora, which was similar to football as well in that 2 teams tried to score into a goal, was mostly restricted to village levels, with outsiders normally barred from taking part. Once the French took over, sports became much more codified and spread out, with intertribal competitions taking place on a regular basis, and football, which had been formally introduced by Italian migrants, was the one that attracted the most attention and interest. The first ever official football league in the country, set up in 1907, was for teams that were either French, Italian, Jewish or Maltese in terms of the playing, coaching and administrative staff, with Tunisian locals forced to sit on the sidelines and watch. Over the coming years, there were growing calls for a solely Tunisian team to be created, and in 1907, Espérance Sportive de Tunis was set up, although their application for a license from the government was originally rejected on account of them posing a risk to the French-controlled teams. 2 years later though, they were finally accepted, albeit with the caveat of being forced to have French board members, and by 1921, 43 more Tunisian teams had joined the nation's governing body, setting up La Ligue Tunisienne, which originally ran alongside the French League before eventually merging with it during the 1940s. It was declared that 5 French teams and 5 Tunisian clubs would be allowed to take part in the official Tunisian league, although the notion of a league wholly consisting of Tunisian sides was violently rejected by the French on account of football games and stadia being perfect occasions and places for protests and demonstrations against them. Eventually, the calls for independence became too big to ignore, and a huge step was taken in 1954 when the French Premier, Pierre Mendès France, promised to grant Tunisia autonomy subject to a decent agreement being reached, which was signed off the next year and fully granted in 1956. Tunisia was declared a republic in 1957, and the monarchy was removed completely, with a presidency being established instead. Ever since then, football has been a huge part of Tunisian national identity, especially because of how key establishing Tunisian football clubs and creating an independent league had been in rising up against their colonizers. It was immediately introduced into the school curriculum upon independence being declared, and unlike many other Arab countries, girls are also encouraged to play the sport from a young age, albeit this hasn't quite resulted in the women's national team qualifying for the World Cup thus far, and they've only made the Women's African Cup of Nations twice, in 2008 and 2020, the latter tournament ultimately being cancelled owing to COVID-19. Perhaps unsurprisingly, football remains the country's most popular sport by a country mile, with domestic and worldwide football being shown on TV on a regular basis. In March 1957, the replacement for the FA that had been set up under French control was established, which became known as the Tunisian Football Federation, hereafter the TFF. 2 months later, the Tunisian men's national team played its first ever officially recognised match, beating Libya 4-2, and they took part in the Pan Arab Games in 1957 as well, coming second in the football competition after losing to Syria in the final. However, they had actually played matches whilst under French control, including a few against France's B team, but of course, since they weren't completely independent when those matches took place, those games do not count as being official. In 1960, they joined both FIFA and CAF and participated in the Olympic Games for the first time, although they would end up finishing last in their group, losing all 3 of their games to Denmark, Argentina and Poland. Over the next 5 years, they experienced great success in the African Cup of Nations, finishing in 3rd in 1962, which was their first AFCON tournament, and 3 years later, having been granted hosting rights, they made it all the way to the final, although they would eventually lose 3-2 in extra time to a Ghana side who were in the midst of a golden generation. They would go relatively quiet over the next decade though, even refusing to participate in qualifying for 3 straight AFCONs in the early 1970s, but they returned with a bang in 1978, finishing 4th at the finals, but that was as a result of them walking off the pitch in the 3rd place playoff against Nigeria after the Super Eagles scored a controversial equaliser, and as such, Nigeria were awarded a 2-0 win by default. An achievement that superseded that, though, was qualifying from the African section of World Cup qualifying to make it to the 1978 World Cup finals in Argentina, and in their maiden game at the competition, they managed to beat World Cup veterans Mexico 3-1, although after narrowly losing to Poland, a 0-0 draw with West Germany in their final game saw the Germans squeak through to the next round at Tunisia's expense. Throughout the 1980s, they would embark on a steep decline, having been banned from competing at the 1980 AFCON tournament owing to what had happened in 1978 against Nigeria, and they only made it to 2 major tournaments in that time, namely the 1982 AFCON and the 1988 Summer Olympics, in which they were eliminated in the first round on both counts. They were selected as hosts of the 1994 AFCON finals owing to Zaire pulling out of hosting the competition not long before the tournament was due to kick off, but yet again they came in last in their 3-team group and were thus sent home once more. Although in this instance they were already home, so it didn't really make much of a difference. Ever since then though, they have made it to every single AFCON finals, finishing in 2nd in 1996 and then lifting it in 2004, a tournament which they hosted, giving them the only major piece of silverware in their entire history. Furthermore, they have participated in 4 more World Cups, those coming in 1988, 2002, 2006 and 2018, although they've been eliminated at the group stages in each of them and only won 1 game across those 4 tournaments, that being a 2-1 win over Panama in 2018, by which point both teams had already been eliminated anyway, making their encounter a dead rubber. They have made a good start to 2022 World Cup qualifying with 2 wins from their first 2 group games against Equatorial Guinea and Zambia, and are well positioned to make it into the 3rd round of qualifying to determine which teams will get those coveted spots at Qatar 2022. Sadly, the success of the national team has been somewhat overshadowed by internal events in the country over the last few decades, with the regime of Zine Ben Ali coming to a brutal end in January 2011 after the onset of the Tunisian revolution. Ben Ali had been accused of corruption and taking the country's money all for himself, with his wife, Leila Ben Ali, regularly taking trips to fashion countries of Europe with money funded by the state. Even though the next president, Monsef Marzouki, passed the constitution in 2014 declaring a second republic, violence still continues to plague the country, and during the COVID-19 pandemic, amidst allegations of more governmental corruption and incompetence in dealing with the pandemic, demonstrations led to incumbent President Kais Saied suspending parliament and dismissing the Prime Minister. Football has been caught up in this too, with the national team's players being criticised for being seen as alleged proponents of the various regimes as a result of them blindly going along with them and refusing to call for change. This transfers over to the general public too, with football being supposedly used as a method of distraction from the true and deep-lying issues within the country. Furthermore, ultras are still a huge problem, as the need to belong to a certain faction means that a significant and ever-growing number of people are caught up in the violence that they create, with the ever-reliable and impartial Daily Mail calling them quote-unquote bloodthirsty prior to their game against England at the 2018 World Cup, which they would lose 2-1 thanks to a late Harry Kane winner. In spite of all of this, the national team is still nonetheless a unifier and continues to form a key part of Tunisia's national identity, irrespective of what the players' true beliefs towards the regimes are. In spite of all of this, the national team is still nonetheless a unifier of the people and continues to form a key part of Tunisia's national identity, and will probably do so for a long time to come. The men's national team's biggest wins are 4 separate wins by 7 goals, when they beat Togo and Malawi 7-0 and Chinese Taipei and Djibouti 8-1, although their biggest defeat outweighs those victories since they were battered 10-1 by Hungary in 1960. Their best position in the FIFA World Rankings in their history was 14th, which they achieved between April and May 2018, and their nadir was only 65th, which they hit in June 2010, with their current position being 28th. Their record appearance maker is former Bolton defender Radhi Jaidi on 105, and their record goalscorer is Issam Gemma with 36 strikes to his name. Moving on to their league, the Tunisian Ligue Professionnelle 1, established in 1956 after they became independent, has been running uninterrupted ever since. As of 2021-22, there are 14 teams who compete in it each year, with 2 being relegated, 2 teams qualifying for the CAF Champions League, and 1, the third place side, qualifying for the Confederation Cup, the equivalent of the Europa League in Africa, alongside the domestic cup winners. The most successful team in the league's history is by far and away Espérance Sportive de Tunis, who have lifted 30 titles since 1956, with Club Africain trailing in second place on 11 overall and Étoile Sportive de Sahel in third place with 9. All 3 of those clubs have won CAF Champions League titles, although AS Tunis have won 4, most recently in 2019, whilst the other 2 have won it just once, with Club Africains coming in 1991 and AS Sahel's Continental Glory arriving in 2007. They are also the 3 most successful sides in the history of the Tunisian Cup, although it is a lot closer than with the league, with AS Tunis having won 15, Club Africain 13 and AS Sahel 10. And that just about wraps up today's video profiling the footballing history and current state in Tunisia. If you enjoyed it, of course, don't forget, like the video, subscribe if you haven't done so already, ring the notification bell to get notified whenever I upload a video straight away, and check out all the other Nation Roulette episodes that I've done thus far using the playlist link in the description down below. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you then.